Ladies and gentlemen, what unfolded on the streets of France on Saturday night will probably go down as one of the most ghastly, the most sinister crimes the modern world has witnessed. The World Music Day Festival, a festival that was meant to unite a nation in song, turned into a night of absolute horror. Across France, 145 people, mostly young women, were stabbed with needles. This was, ladies and gentlemen, a mass syringe strike. Question is, what was in these syringes? There are fears that these needles may have been laced with date rape drugs, but there is no official confirmation on that yet. 13 of these jabbings, ladies and gentlemen, was in Paris, the capital of France. Some victims had to be rushed to hospital with complaints of dizziness and feeling disoriented, and toxicology reports are awaited in most of these cases. So we still do not know exactly what was in these syringes, only that a syringe attack has taken place, and it was a mass attack, not an isolated incident. Now, reports from France are suggesting that drugs like Rofinol and GHB could have been used to render victims defenseless and therefore vulnerable to sexual assault. Was that the end? What makes this crime even more chilling is that posts on social media had called for women to be targeted and jabbed during the music festival. There was already a pre-warning. France is now left grappling with a sickening question. How did this happen? How could predators roam free amongst millions armed with syringes, turning a night of celebration into a complete nightmare? And who were these men? Were they a gang of immigrants? Were they acting solo, or were they a gang looking to molest and rape women that night? That is my question this evening to my guests who are joining me here. Anne-Elisabeth is a columnist for the London Telegraph. She's with us. She's someone who knows Paris very closely. In fact, she's joining us from Paris. And Ashok Kumar is an associate professor of political economy at the Birkbeck University of London, joining us on the broadcast. Thanks to both of you for your time here on Times Now. And can I just come to you? We still don't have clarity of what exactly was in the syringes, right? The suspicion is that it could be a date rape drug. Are you hearing anything at all? And are you surprised at what has happened, given the fact that there was already a pre-warning?
I think it's more opportunistic than gang. There have been there are inquiries going on now, and it's not very sure exactly how that goes. But it is not something that is planned for profit. It is something that was planned because of opportunity. And the opportunity, unfortunately, in France has been without those syringe incidents. But it's been that whenever you've got an event, a football victory, a football defeat, it doesn't matter. There will be large groups, comparatively large groups. They're less than 1% of the people attending the celebrations or the non-celebration of the event. But they come and they know that they can make mischief, and mischief can be breaking things, it can be burning cars, it can be attacking shops, looting, and it's getting more and more savage. And the worry about that, there's a feeling in France that there's a complete lack of policing, and that it has not been taken into account in terms of preparing in advance of the events. What's interesting is last year we had the Olympic Games in France, and there was complete security with access to any place where people could meet to see the games, very controlled, and there was absolutely not a single effect, not a single event of that type. So it really is a question of how far is the police ready to do it, and how far can you suspend human liberties as well.
And there is commentary on social media, which is why I'm asking you this question. I'm also asking you my next question because there are videos now available on Twitter, on YouTube. And this one particular video that I can't put on air because, there are copyright issues. But there's a young woman, she's a French woman, she's wearing a cross. And there are some men who do not see, because the camera is only pointed towards the girl, they are saying, haram, haram. And she turns back to them, looks them straight in the eye and says, well, very well then, and very good that I'm Christian. And they say, oh yeah, and she responds by saying, oh yeah. My question to you is, in the commentary on social media, is that most of the attacks, the syringe attacks that were carried out, were possibly by immigrants. Are you hearing anything about that? Is that concern, is that worry that is rooted in reality?
It is a worry that is rooted in reality, but the reality is that some of these people may very well have been migrants, and whoever is arrested, we will know whether they're foreign-born and not have papers. They're not French citizens, but you also have third-generation migrants from a different time, and the parents integrated, and the children integrated, and the grandchildren are not integrating, and they have a narrative that is very often a kind of cut-rate Islamism in which they understand the prohibitions, but there's no understanding of what the religion is all about. And there have been several investigators and there have been several specialists in France who say it is used to create havoc and it is directed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And again, this is something that is being studied. There was a report about the action of the Muslim Brotherhood in France that was published by the French state about 3 weeks ago. It is part of the idea that if you impose a certain type of values, it becomes viral in a sort of vicious way of things getting viral, and then you can have those young men who don't know much and certainly haven't read the Quran from beginning to end, and who will say it's haram, and if I see you in a miniskirt, or if I see you in a normal skirt, that's enough for me to do what I want because you have forfeited the right to be considered as an honourable woman. And all of this is a logic that is dangerous and that spreads very easily.
Ashok Kumar, would you want to come in here? We do understand where this commentary, anti-immigrant commentary, is coming from. The fact is that Europe does have a migrant problem. One, they are trying to fight off. But for example, if you just look at France, 10% of France's population right now is made up of immigrants. Do you think it is right for us at this point of time, when investigations are still on, to link it to immigrants or to Muslims living in France? Or is this just something that we should take as a law and order issue?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember this, and maybe your viewers know about this, but last year there were mobs driven by Hindus in Leicester, in Britain. I certainly don't think that we would say there's something about Hinduism that motivated them to do those riots, right? Same in Canada. Most of the migrants who are coming in India, in Canada right now, are Indian Hindus. There's a huge anti-migrant sentiment. I don't think that is something particular about Hinduism and Hindu culture that's driving the violence and the homelessness in Canada. The idea that immigration leads to more crime simply isn't backed up by the evidence. Study after study, including government data, shows that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens per capita. In Britain, the Ministry of Justice just recently, their own figures showed lower conviction rates among foreign-born residents. In the U.S., states with higher migrants have lower crime rates than those with lower migrant rates. So we can say these impulsive things, but I don't think, I mean, the evidence just doesn't support that. If people already have anti-migrant sentiment, if there's a football riot full of white British people or white French people, no one will say something particular about British culture or French culture that's leading to that violence. But, like, for example, what's happened in France, we don't know what's happened still and what the composition of the people are. But let's say it comes out that it is more migrants, the focus will be about something particular about the culture. And so the myth survives because it's politically useful. It's used to sort of, these kind of crackdowns are used to justify and distract from lots of different social problems. If you look at far-right parties in France, far-right parties in Britain, they use the question of migration to not address issues that we're dealing with in society, like inequality or whatever it might be. Yes, this is a problem and the state needs to deal with it, but it's not about immigration because the studies and the research doesn't back that up. Excuse me.
No, I understand that studies and research is not backing up the link between immigration and crime, but the fact is that the French president a couple of years ago on television had said, if you just look at Paris, 50% of the crimes that are committed in Paris are by immigrants. Again, in London, where you live. When you're talking about grooming gangs, the British police was too scared to say, Asians, especially Pakistanis, were involved because they thought they would be seen as racists. So sometimes, you know, police forces don't come out and say things openly. In this case, the identity of the 14 men who have been arrested have not been released. But we've seen what has happened in London as well.
Look, if you look at London per capita, in terms of Britain's highest immigration population, it's not nearly as dangerous as small towns where there's almost no migrants. If you look at it per capita, yes, there was an issue of the grooming gangs. But if you look at the total population of, let's say, Pakistani men and compare them to British men, the proportion of the population in terms of sexual violence is exactly the same, or it's actually less. Once you control for class, geography, other social conditions, there's not something particular about the culture. What you're making here is a kind of eugenics argument. You're saying there's something particular about Hindus in Leicester that drove them to do violence. There's something particular about Muslims in France that makes them more violent. But what is it particular? You're saying, is there some barbarism that's part of being from the global south or a post-colonial country that makes us more violent? Is that the argument you're making? Are you saying we're more violent than whites? Or is that the argument? Because it's very hard for me to understand. You're rejecting the studies. Yes, there were grooming gangs. There's also, if you look at pedophilia rates in this country, it's overwhelmingly done by British men. But nobody really talks about that. I mean, the state has continuously, for 40 years, protected pedophiles in positions of power. We know that. But nobody says that's a problem with elite white men who are doing that.
But Anne, is that the conversation in Paris as well? That this is not a problem linked to immigration. The syringe attack had nothing to do with immigrants. It's probably something else.
I would say that it certainly sounds a lot like the conversation going on in France, but I would argue that the types of crimes are different. We know perfectly well, for instance, that in Britain you have lots of sexual violence and lots of sexual crimes committed within families, and that is something that is evenly spread among the population wherever they come from. However, there's a certain time of misogynistic violence, the use of girls, the use of women in those conferences, those meetings in Paris, recent violences, for instance. So that is more specifiedly. That is not something that is just French or in the same proportion. So I think the nature of the crimes, if you go in a more granular way, there is something. I mean, that's not for nothing that they say you are haram, and haram means both that it's forbidden and it also means that you are impure, with all the consequences and the misogynistic attitudes that do exist. And that's one thing. The other thing is, in terms of petty crime, if you look at the number of the prisoners inside French prisons, 70% come from migrant background, and therefore you can say, and probably with some justice, that there's an element of class and lack of affluence. But there's also a real cultural problem as well.
Okay, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. This was a good conversation. I'm glad we had it. And thank you very much. Ashok Kumar, thank you very much for joining us on the big story playing out in France this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, a quick break. There's more on the other side. Do stay with us.